am the Space Quest historian. I've recently started playing games in my own time again, and it's actually been a nice refreshing change from playing games on a live stream and trying to be entertaining at the same time. One of those games was a little known thing called Monolith, developed by German game studio Animation Arts, which is frankly an ironic name for a studio that seems to cock up in the animation department with startling regularity, but we'll get to all that. The premise is simple. You're an astronaut marooned on a far-flung deserted planet, and to compound matters, you're also suffering from a bad case of amnesia, so you're not even sure what the hell you're supposed to be doing. But whoever landed your ship did such a piss-poor job of it that the tip is dangling precariously over a steep cliff, so maybe our first order of business should be to go and have a stern talk with the pilot, and oh, he seems to have fucked off. Well, I guess our first order of business is to find him and figure out what the fuck is going on then. Setting aside the fairly tired amnesia trope for a second, the promise of getting to explore an alien planet in search of both your memories and whatever circumstances brought you here is enticing, especially since the ID card in your spacesuit bears an entirely different name than the one your main character seems to think she was born with. While she's convinced her name is Tessa Carter, the ID card says Melissa Luna, so either we hit our head even worse in the crash than we assumed, or some dun-dun-dun strange shit is going on. And this might be a good time to warn you that this video is going to spoil the shit out of the mystery, because the main reason I'm even making this video at all is that the mystery reveal at the end pissed me off, and I want to rant about that, so there's your spoiler warning, kids. If you don't want it ruined for you, then stop this video and go play it for yourself. Ron Gilbert, the Monkey Island guy, once said, "Adventure games didn't die, they just went on holiday in Germany." And it's true, Germans love point-and-click adventure games. When everyone else was busy declaring adventure games dead in between fawning over the latest graphical advancement in first-person shooters in the late 90s and early 2000s, German game developers and publishers was like, "We never got this memo," and kept cranking out point-and-click games to a delighted German audience. This is how Simon the Sorcerer got not one, but two classic point-and-click adventure game sequels that you've never heard of. But German adventure games are also fucking brutal. While other developers around the world are bending over backwards trying to ease their audiences into accepting adventure games into their lives again, German kids were brought up on moon logic and frightfully complicated logic puzzles. It's in their DNA at this point. Reaching for a walkthrough is not only frowned upon, it is seen as a sign of weakness. Monolith is an easy game by German standards. Hell, it even has an in-game walkthrough available, which I had to reach for several times during my playthrough. And you can tell this was a feature that was strong-armed in at the last minute, because not only is it just a bare-bones step-by-step walkthrough full of grammatical errors and an almost condescending bullet point list approach to hint-giving that just dispassionately spells out exactly what it is you need to do, it also displays this "Are you sure you want to do this?" dialogue box every time you try to go anywhere near it. The puzzles in this game ping-pong between your standard bread-and-butter inventory puzzles and logic puzzles, or, as this game refers to them, mini-games. The logic puzzles are all skippable, which is another benign touch. In fact, the skip button will start pulsating wildly if you spend more than 5 seconds fucking around with these puzzles, which is honestly a bit rude, I think. I mean, yeah, I know you're there. Could you just shut up and let me work this out for a minute? It's like the game is telling you, "Hurry up, I'm bored. You obviously have no idea what you're doing. Let's just move this thing forward already." The logic puzzles are also suspiciously simple for the most part. I'd usually take any excuse to skip a logic puzzle, but I was actually able to solve all of them on my own, except for the one where you're meant to weigh 2 materials in a very specific ratio, which sounded like math, so I gave it one shot, failed, and then just fucking skipped it. One recurring type of logic puzzle involves pulling out and reinserting a bunch of wires, and these baffle me because I wouldn't even call them puzzles, to be honest. The wires just have to be plugged into whatever outlet lights up green, so it's not even something you have to think about. There's no challenge whatsoever. You just plug in wires randomly until they're satisfied, and there's no obstacle like, oh, maybe this wire has to go in first, or these wires have to be color coordinated, or anything. Maybe they were just really proud of their dangling wire physics model. I don't know. The most interesting logic puzzle to me was this one late in the game where you have a mirror version of yourself on the other side of a chasm, and every time you move, the mirror person moves in the opposite direction. Now, the goal wasn't immediately clear to me, but once I figured out that what you're meant to do is get both of you to stand on these middle blocks so you can pass each other without coming into direct contact with one another, it became an honestly very stimulating brain teaser. I almost skipped it after the first few tries because I got frustrated that it wouldn't tell me what it was expecting me to do. do, but in hindsight, it's pretty fucking obvious. And solving it on my own gave me one of those very rare, yay, me so smart victory endorphin boosts. So I'm glad I didn't skip it. The inventory puzzles are what you'll be doing for 90% of the game though. A staple of German adventure game design is to chuck 5 million disparate inventory items at the player right from the start that seem to be of absolutely no use, but you know you'll obviously need them later because, well, adventure game logic. This picking shit up for no other reason than because you can approach is one of the reasons why I find German adventure games a bit hard to get into. It's a bit immersion breaking when a main character starts picking up random shit off the floor because they somehow instinctively know it'll come in use later down the line even though they haven't encountered the obstacle it's meant to be used for yet. And to this game's credit, it actually avoids this pitfall for the most part. Most of the items you snatch are well integrated into the story and don't really reek of adventure game logic. My only real complaint is that most of these items are kind of bland and utilitarian. You've got a wrench, a screwdriver, a metal pole, some wires, an assortment of nuts and bolts. I mean, Tessa's less of an adventure game character and more of a walking toolbox, really. She's also on her own for practically the entire adventure, save for her little buzzing robot companion whose primary function is to plot dump on her with the occasional quip thrown in for good measure. So there are no dialogue puzzles because Tessa doesn't really have anyone to talk to. The robot companion is meant to be this comic relief character for her to bounce ideas off of and drop hints as to what she's supposed to do next, but his dialogue mostly falls flat. Maybe it's due to quirks in the German to English translation, or maybe it's just because of the stilted voice acting in the English version.
This door over here is not as far open as the other one, but with the pointy object, you might be able to get through.
I mean, I get it, he's a robot, and I guess in terms of sounding like ChatGPT's distant cousin, he does an okay job, but it's clear they meant for him to have this sort of charming puppy dog personality, and it just doesn't come across. Come to think of it, the rest of the voice cast isn't particularly stellar either, if you'll forgive the fucking pun. It seems to be one of those cases where the actors were given little to no direction on how to inflect or deliver their lines, and what little emotion is actually conveyed sounds like it's being delivered in a vacuum on a line-by-line basis. Tessa especially seems to bounce from cheerfully optimistic to despondent and raw nerve emotional in the span of mere seconds. Even when you do get to hear from other characters beside Miss Astro Chicken and R2 Fuck You here, the actors seem more confused than invested in what they're saying. But I guess I can't begrudge the game too much for this. It is, after all, a fairly low-budget game that already had to spend a sizable chunk of its budget having the whole script translated from German to English. I imagine there weren't a lot of euros at the bottom of the spreadsheet left for hiring decent voice talent or a director who had any idea what to do besides saying, "We're rolling." But on the whole, the game is a pretty decent sci-fi mystery game for about 3/4 of the way through. At first, the promise of discovering Tessa's forgotten memories seem enticing, and they become even more intriguing once a mysterious signal leads you to find a dilapidated base on this supposedly deserted planet. Then you discover that Tessa was actually the commanding officer of the station and not the spacefaring explorer she thought she was. And then a mysterious figure jumps her and smashes up the communications console, cutting off her last remaining hope of ever contacting a potential rescue, despite this little hovering twerp's assurances that there were no life signs at all. And the name tag on the intruder's spacesuit is Melissa Luna, the lady the game tried to tell us was our real name from the start. So as an audience, we start to wonder whether Tessa is really right in the head and imagining all of this shit, or if this is some sort of intergalactic ghost story or a time travel mindfuck like the movie Triangle. Seriously, if you haven't watched that movie, go do it now. Fuck this video. There are more important things in life. Anyway, this point is where the story reaches its apex in terms of suspense, but unfortunately, it's also downhill from here. And here come the big spoilers, so if you didn't heed my warning earlier, now's the time to shut off this video if you don't want it ruined for you. It turns out all this time Tessa was actually in a coma in present-day Canada, and all this stuff about being some futuristic space explorer / outpost bureaucrat was all in her head. Not only that, but she was also a neglectful mother and spouse who preferred to spend all day and night at her workplace writing a novel about a brave space explorer called Melissa Luna. And because she has the timekeeping skills of a turnip, she found herself late for a funeral and plowed a car headfirst into a tree. She's been spending the entire game recounting her story in interstitial cutscenes to a hospital staff member who was giving me seriously sketchy vibes throughout the whole game because her stilted character model and spooky monotone voice led me to assume she was some sort of creepy space monster in human form whose head and torso would eventually split open Cronenberg style and bite Tessa's stupid head off or something. But no, it turns out the character model was just shit and the voice actress had no idea how to play the character, so great bit of misdirection if that was intended, fellas, but I very much doubt it was. Anyway, the whole thing unravels as this sort of, oh, I'm an author and I got lost in my own creation type of bullshit, because writers love writing about how important they are and how the craft of writing is this sacred art form that consumes you. And look, unless you're The Shining, you can get the fuck out of here with that bullshit. It's self-indulgent is what it is, and this trope needs to fucking die. If I ever see another piece of fiction where the synopsis is, a writer goes someplace to write a book and it starts taking over their lives, or their creations start coming alive and they start losing their grip on reality because they're just so engrossed in their work, it's a hard pass for me. I don't make self-important videos about how hard it is to make videos, and I certainly don't pretend that what I'm doing is a noble endeavor for the betterment of the human race. If you're so engrossed in writing and being an author to the point where you start ignoring every other facet of your existence, you need to get your head checked. I know the takeaway from the story is that it's important to balance your day-to-day life with your creative aspirations and all, but still, fuck you. It still reeks of self-aggrandizing bullshit, and I hate it. Writers need to stop writing stories about how hard it is to be a writer. Just fucking stop already. You're not that important. This tortured writer shit needs to stop. Writers think they're such precious creatures and that they're so perpetually misunderstood, and they're not. They're just a bunch of whiny little bitches who think their craft is so much more important than everyone else's. So yeah, I was having an okay time with Monolith until it whipped this little twist out of its ass, and it instantly made me hate the main character to the point where I just wish she'd stay in the coma and done us all a favor. Okay, focus. Let's take a deep breath and go to our happy place and wrap this shit up. Like I said, the game is your standard point-and-click affair, and there are thankfully no timed events or action sequences to contend with, and that was honestly a big relief because I was playing this game on the Nintendo Switch, and the controls are a bit janky. You move the mouse cursor around with the right thumbstick, but it doesn't actually move the way you think it does. If you hold the stick down in a direction, the cursor just sort of stops after a little while. You have to babysit it across the screen by rotating around the thumbstick in this weird little circle, and I honestly don't know why it's doing that. I played the Excavation of Hobbs Barrow on the Switch too, and it had me moving the cursor around with the thumbstick too, but that worked exactly how you'd expect it to. For some reason, Monolith's cursor just seems to fall asleep and forget what it is you're telling it to do a second after you push it in any direction, and you just sort of have to keep reminding it of where you want it to go by jiggling it around a bit. The game also feels really sluggish despite there not being anything really graphically intense going on screen. The backgrounds are all flat static images with 3D models on top, but the 3D models themselves are these really low detailed kind of affairs. They honestly look a bit shit, especially during close-ups, and good god, the frame rate just fucking tanks whenever there's an in-game close-up. I have no idea how they managed to make 3D models that look this fucked up and still somehow have them bring the Switch to its fucking knees and begging for mercy every time the models take up more than a quarter of the screen. Well, those were indeed some happy thoughts, weren't they? I'd say on the whole, Monolith is a pretty okay game. It's nothing too spectacular. The mystery's pretty cool up until it's revealed what the fuck is actually going on, and the puzzles are actually, for the most part, pretty good and rewarding to solve. The background art is absolutely gorgeous throughout, but they contrast significantly with the piss-poor 3D character models. The writing is also a bit all over the place. Sometimes it tries to be witty, but for the most part it's just serviceable, and it takes a complete nosedive near the end into this sort of overwrought and pretentious babbling of someone trying to be deep but having nothing worthwhile to say. So if you're ever going to play Monolith, I'd say do it if you're hankering for some classic adventure game puzzles that are challenging but honestly very well balanced, and not for the story, which I've just ruined for you anyway, so what would be the point? And if you're a writer looking for inspiration for your next work of art, then do me a favor and check to see if your head is launched up your ass. If it is, then pull it out and try to write something that's actually relatable. Okay, I'm gonna stop now and watch the angry comments from the fiction writers community roll in, so until next time, I'll see you around the Chrono Stream. Bye!
able to